30 years ago, I was in front of this building. There is a pyramid of Egypt. And I was lucky enough to go inside and discover that less than 5% of the building is actually usable space. And for me, this building represents the essence of architecture, that is about translating a specific moment of society, but also about showing the development in technology. The pyramids of Giza that has been built 5,000 years ago, designed by Imhotep, architect and engineer, they are possible thanks to innovation at that time, because if the Egyptians hasn't solved how to place all these massive stones through those ramps, this building will never exist. And if we go to Rome, that was 2,000 years later, and if we see the Pantheon, something similar happened. It was the first time that they actually built a spherical dome on top of the walls. This building reminds us of the importance of the innovation in architecture. When you see the sections, you can understand the different moments of the thickness in the cement that make possible the building. This is the building where the Romans discussed their laws, and they took the decision to leave the upper part of the building open so that the gods can witness their discussions. Even today, when we visit the building, it reminds us the essence of architecture, that is about designing spaces for people, it's about space and light, but it's at the end about how you put together a structure in a specific moment and time. But it's also about context, so I invite you to come to Mexico, only 25 years later, and see the pyramid of the sun that is in the city of Teotihuacan. This pyramid has been used for the Aztecs to review and to protect the city. And it's a massive building that doesn't have any space inside. And it's the space where they sacrifice humans because they thought that was a way to give to an honor to the sun. And as civilization evolved, I am convinced that the technologies we use are the technologies that it will help us to define the buildings that surround us. In other words, that the buildings are the results of the technology of their time. If we go, for example, to a medieval town and we see the type of windows they have and the type of architecture they have produced, it's basically the translation of that specific historical moment. And then we see through the history how important implementations and innovations, such as, for example, the way in which we start to control the perspectives, enable us to integrate better the art and the architecture in the Renaissance, or also the way in which we were able to define and design the boats. We're able to define, for example, Columbus trips that help us to define new continents, such as the Americas. The innovations that, for example, Leonardo developed that became important for the future of civilization. The Gunther printing press that help us to spread the knowledge. Very important is optic discoveries in the 16th century allowed us to see the landscape in completely different ways. The artificial light help us to expand the definition of architecture at night. The laws of Newton help us to understand materiality. And as we go in the history, we realize how important has been innovation for the definition of the context and of architecture. For example, here, the first building in iron built in 1832. The Frank Lloyd Wright brothers at the beginning of the possibility of flying and seeing the context from different perspectives. As population growth and technology is developed, of course, the industrialization. And even if we want to bring the process back, there's no process back in innovation. It's always towards future, no? Forward. This is the first drawing that Otis developed. That was the precursor of the lifts that are today the elevators that basically change the landscape of our cities, combined with the industrialization of steel, make buildings such as Flatiron here in New York, and help that we start to densify our cities and together with other innovations, as for example, how to cast concrete at higher levels, the control of air conditioning, help us to understand the possibilities of how we can, in less space, build more vertically. And what a better city than New York that really analyze how we can densify our cities and how we have used technology and architecture to really uh, densify the context. No? Here is a house of Le Corbusier in 1931, the Villa Savoy. And this is the type of car that represent that time. No? So all levels of design are hyper connected, and architecture for me is the result of the technology of their time. This is a house of Philip Johnson, the type of car that exists at that time. And a small example of the relationship between architecture and their context at the time. This is Moshe Shavdi, the Habitat in Montreal. And this is the type of computers that exist at that time. And I think in the middle of that of previous century, a very important shift of technology has happened. That was how the innovation was driven by the public sector has changed to the beginning of how innovation was driven by private sectors. This is the Pentagon and many of the important innovations aspects, such as technology, GPS, the cellular phones, etc. And then this is the headquarters by Norman Foster of Apus. That is basically one of the companies that is driving now the technology in the world. No? The first maquette that happened 8 years later, that is the precursor of all Apple maquettes. The Macintosh that represent in a way the integration of software and hardware with the innovation in internet. Internet that captures all the knowledge. The Web 2.0 that allowed us, each of us, to become a producer. And that is creating also that we not only build content, but also that we are building services, and this is helping to change the way in which we interact and operate. For me, Google is still the epicenter of the innovation because it's the only company that has been founded by 40 years old visionaries that has the resources and the possibility to actually do a long-term investment in very important innovation sectors. For example, they just put together a company that will bet for the next 20 years on how to extend and expand the life expectancy. And I think it's very interesting to see how in design we basically are overlapping all the possibilities. This is one of the projects we have been working. It's a small villa, and the difference for architects today is that we have been able to actually overlap all our different moments and layers of how we work and how we interact with our teams. This is a small villa, try to propose that we reduce the footprint, and by doing that we concentrate the living space as the center of the house, and then we create a kind of three-dimensional trust that organize all the private rooms at the top. The villa is a villa that captures more water, recycle the water, capture natural light with solar panels, and in that sense create more green area all around the house. Similar to a car, in essence is for transportation, but the car should reflect also the moment of the time. And for us, in this case, the house was also the essence, remains the same, but the materialization and the aesthetics should be completely innovative and connected with their time. No? It's also very interesting to see in the context such as Mexico, how you can try to take that technology and try to connect it with human labor that is extraordinarily capable. No? And I would like to show you another small project we have done in Mexico, that it was a children's room. So we were proposing to create a shelf-like structure that wraps in itself and was creating a small ramp that connects to the garden. Since these are millennials, we thought it was very interesting to do a room that was basically a continuous space, and that the citizens basically use this context to try to enjoy their moment in their life. These are children running from the apartments of their kids towards the interior of the space. And here you see the structure that was for us very important, understood how we can use technology, but also that how we can use this very capable labor to develop the project. No? Years later, I have been invited to design a museum in Mexico City that was going to hold one of the most important collections of Auguste Rodin. And we basically were invited to analyze this site that is in the perimeter of Mexico City. First, we start to work in site 1, and then we move to site 2. The site 1, we invite another museum of contemporary art, Jumex collection, that will open next month to place their collection. And in the second site, we develop a project after many years of design that was basically with the idea of taking the forces of the program, but also the forces of the site, and then try to do vertically a museum that connects 7 exhibition spaces with ramps, and that also explore the possibilities of how Mexico is extremely capable of doing innovative structural solutions. So this is a section of the building that is the essence of the project. You have 28 columns, with each one with different geometry, that carry 70-meter span roof at the top that enables to liberate free of columns the sculpture's floor plan. This is all the floor plans superimposed, and here you see how for us was interesting that the geometries of the building was translating the diversity of the collection. No? This is the way we built the project, a ring of concrete, 28 columns, and then we wrap with the skin. This is the site of construction. We built it in 2.5 years, so it was a record time, and we built it with a company of our clients, so that was also quite interesting process for us. Here's how we solved the skin that is composed by 16,000 hexagon panels of aluminum. We have done almost like a dress. We put the central belt of 43 centimeters hexagons, and then we basically develop 1,000 different families that take the different deformations of the building. And this is only possible to be developed in the last 10 years, and that's a way in which the building connects with a specific time. People don't realize the real scale of the building until they go inside. They always thought that this building is probably half of the height because of the way in which the facade has been solved. This is the day of the opening. It has been visited by 2 million citizens in the first 2 years. And it's a mission about how to bring art for the people for free forever in a country where the government will never be able to place together a collection of European and global art. This is the context. At the front of the museum. At the back, we have built 500,000 square meters of construction with a mixed program that includes more offices, shopping, another museum, a theater. There's the second phase of the construction, and that's the third phase that will be developing next year. The total is 1 million square meters of construction of one single developer, but around it, there's another 1 million coming. So that makes it the biggest project in the country. And what is interesting is, in this discussion of technology, how a building can also become a destination in the city, and how young people use that as really a way to get connected with a specific building. No? And I think I have been practicing in Europe as a young architect in the 90s, and when the Guggenheim was launched, everybody was so excited about the possibility of a building that cost $200 million and produced 10 times that for profit for the region. But then in the crisis, everybody were complaining about how architecture can be so disobedient and how can be so expensive, so we should just all get rid of icons. And then the agenda of architecture turned to try to do buildings that were simpler and more economical. No? And we have been working in the idea of you are the context. For us, you are the context, meaning that is not only the time that is important, but it's also the content of the program, the designer agenda, the client vision, and also the time and the place. No? The client has their own vision, has their own understanding of the conditions. The architect has his own way of doing a translation process. In the case of the Guggenheim, for example, Frank Lloyd Wright and his obsession of cars has made, even with sacrificing the efficiency of a flat wall, has made one of the most important beautiful icons. No? And when we work on architecture, what we like to do is to explore the possibilities of how we can actually create icons that without reducing efficiency, such as this example of a project we are doing in Florida, where we organized 250 apartments in a silhouette that is circular without sacrificing the efficiency of the project. Or where we are working also in Middle East for a museum of photography, and we think how to connect all the exhibition floor plans around a void that is at the same time the patio that organizes the Publix Plaza. Or where we work in a gallery for design in Mexico City, and we think how we can actually organize the program in different floor plans, and then connect it with a continuous ramp that is working structurally in compression as an arch. No? Or we work in a competition for a library with a museum in Taichung, where we basically analyze the possibilities of how we can do an architecture that organizes well a museum and connect it with the public around the building. No? And to end the presentation, I just like to speak about a project in G20 reunion that happens in Los Cabos. We were invited to design the convention center, and we thought it was interesting to create a pyramid where we organize all the program. But ends up to become that the time in the discussion of bureaucracy forced us to do something more rational. So we were with a terrible pressure to submit something newer that was in one sense more efficient and greener, but in the other sense also less costly and that can get built faster. So we developed the project. There is a structure that you can build in 7 months. The project was reviewed daily with this three-dimensional capture of every single element in the construction process. And then we were able to deliver this project that has the biggest green wall in the planet with all the roof that takes energy from the sun. And that make a project that successfully was launched on time, where all the leaders gathered together with very extraordinary moments. Some others not so extraordinary with Confucius. And they were going to discuss 3 days. And the first day they talk about the economy, the second day about the economy, and the third way about the economy. So it's evident that the agenda is driven by the economy, first of all, not by the leaders, but also how architecture really translate the economy. Here is more radiography of all the high rises in the world. They are related with the gross domestic product possibilities of their country. So the ones that are more than 5% growth, they have taller than 50 stories. When they grow more than 7%, they start to imagine rotations and other effects. No? And to end, I just want to show this city that we have designed. There is a city with 1 kilometer height that has the possibility to organize a mixed-use project. I finish with this. It's basically one of the things that I'm convinced is that the cities will evolve to have more and more private control. No? If we compare the taxis in New York against Uber, the services, then we realize how difficult it will be for governments and for bureaucracy to actually compete with how private sectors are organizing their information as comparison to also Amazon, how a company such as this one with logarithms is able to place technology to help us to find the real needs of the context. No? And I think the challenge for the future in degree of architecture is how the current infrastructure of the city will be replaced smoothly by private innovation. Thank you very much.